Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we are diving deep into Parmesan cheese pizza.
You sent us a fantastic recipe and a podcast segment.
And we are so excited to break it all down.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack the how-to.
And then we'll also talk about what makes Parmesan so special for pizza.
Yeah, like what techniques we can all use to get that really great outcome.
Exactly.
Think of it like we're taking pizza night to a whole new level.
Level up your pizza game.
Get ready for some cheesy insights.
I love it.
So the recipe and the podcast segment you sent in, they really highlighted Parmesan as like the star.
The star ingredient, absolutely.
It got me thinking, we use it on pizza all the time as a topping, but this recipe seems to really celebrate it in a different way.
In a different way, yeah.
I'm curious to get your take on that.
Well, I think it's fascinating how this recipe really leans into the unique qualities of Parmesan. The long aging process, which can sometimes be up to 36 months.
Wow.
Results in a really low moisture content, and that's what gives you that sharp, nutty flavor.
It really comes through.
That's a great point. And that low moisture content you mentioned, that's actually what makes it perfect for getting all crispy in the oven, right?
Exactly. It creates these irresistible crispy bits that add this wonderful textural element to the pizza.
Yeah, and they even suggest incorporating it into the dough, which is not your average pizza dough at all.
No, not at all.
And speaking of the dough, in the recipe in the segment, they really emphasize taking your time with the rising process, like a full hour.
It's crucial.
Why is that so important?
Well, allowing that dough to rise properly is crucial for gluten development. And that gluten development is what gives you that lighter, airier crust. They also mentioned the window pane test to check if the dough has been kneaded enough.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you explain what the window pane test is?
Sure.
And why is it so important for pizza dough? Yeah. The window pane test is a simple way to check if you've developed enough gluten in your dough. You take a small piece of the dough and you stretch it gently. And if you can stretch it thin enough that you can actually see light through it without it tearing, then you've achieved that beautiful gluten structure.
That's amazing.
That's key for a pizza crust that can hold its shape and has that perfect chewiness.
So that's the science behind it.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. Now let's move on to the sauce.
Yes, the sauce.
They kept it pretty simple, it seems. Just tomato sauce, garlic powder, and oregano.
I love it. I think that simplicity really speaks to the heart of this recipe. It's all about letting those fresh, high-quality ingredients really shine through.
Yeah. They did have a couple of optional additions, though, like using San Marzano tomatoes.
Oh, yeah.
Or adding a pinch of red pepper flake.
Yeah, which are all great ways to kind of personalize the flavor.
For sure.
But even those additions are still relatively simple. It really emphasizes that idea that you don't need a ton of complicated ingredients to make a delicious sauce.
And now comes the fun part, putting it all together.
Yes. Assembly time.
They talk about rolling the dough out into a 12-inch circle.
A nice 12-inch circle.
Spreading that sauce.
Evenly spreading the sauce.
And then, of course, the cheese.
Now we're talking. They recommend a good amount of mozzarella.
Oh, yeah. Gotta have that mozzarella.
For that classic melted cheesy pull.
Of course, yeah.
But it's the Parmesan, used both before and after baking, that elevates this pizza to something special.
That double dose of Parmesan, both before and after baking, that's really what sets this recipe apart.
I'm curious, what do you think the ideal ratio of mozzarella to Parmesan is to achieve that perfect balance of flavor and texture?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on your personal preference.
Of course, yeah.
But I would say a ratio of about 3-to-1 mozzarella to Parmesan is a good starting point.
Yeah.
That allows the mozzarella to provide that classic gooiness.
While still letting the Parmesan's unique flavor come through.
I love that you mentioned personal preference because ultimately the best pizza is the one that you enjoy the most.
Absolutely.
Now the final step, baking.
Baking?
They suggest 10 to 12 minutes in a 500-degree oven.
That's hot.
It's pretty hot.
It is.
Why such a high temperature?
Well, that high heat is essential for getting that crispy crust and perfectly melted cheese.
They also mentioned using a pizza stone or a baking sheet for optimal crispiness.
Yes.
Have you ever experimented with other cooking methods, like using a grill?
Oh, yeah.
Or a cast iron skillet?
Absolutely.
I'm so curious how those might affect the final product.
Those are great questions, and we'll definitely delve deeper into those alternative cooking methods a bit later. But first, I want to hear what stood out to you the most so far in this part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into Parmesan cheese pizza. Before we get to those alternative cooking methods,
Okay.
I want to go back to a key point they made.
Okay.
Don't overload the pizza.
Oh, yeah. That's something I'm definitely guilty of.
It's so tempting.
It's so tempting to pile on all the toppings.
Right. And it can lead to uneven cooking and a soggy crust.
Right.
They especially cautioned against too much sauce.
Oh, a soggy crust? That's the worst. It's a pizza tragedy.
Way worse.
They also talk about grating your Parmesan fresh.
Yes.
Now, why is that so important?
Well, pre-shredded cheese, it often contains added cellulose to prevent clumping, and that can really affect how well it melts.
No, interesting.
Freshly grated Parmesan just melts beautifully and creates those crispy, flavorful bits
We love those.
we all know and love.
It's amazing how the little details can make such a big difference
Absolutely.
in the final product.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's get back to those alternative cooking methods you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
A grill or a cast iron skillet.
Right?
What are the advantages of each?
Well, grilling, of course, imparts that wonderful smoky flavor
Ooh,
and char to the crust, adding another dimension to the overall taste.
I love
A
that.
cast iron skillet, on the other hand, creates like this intense, even heat,
Okay.
resulting in a remarkably crispy crust.
Both of those options sound so tempting.
It's true.
I'm just picturing that smoky aroma of a grilled pizza with all that melty Parmesan. Oh,
It's making me hungry.
I know, me too.
But yeah, it's really all about choosing the method that best suits your taste and the equipment you have.
Makes sense.
They didn't get into the specifics of each method,
Okay.
but it's a great opportunity to experiment and find what works best for you.
I love that. Experimentation is what makes cooking fun.
Exactly.
It's about taking a recipe
Yeah.
as like a starting point
Yeah,
and then making it your own.
exactly. Now, speaking of personalization, they also encouraged experimenting with toppings, suggesting sautéed mushrooms
Ooh,
or thinly sliced cooked beef.
Okay, good choices.
What I found so intriguing
Yeah.
was they didn't limit the suggestions. It's really open for you to explore your own topping combinations.
That's a great way to empower the listener
I think so too.
and encourage culinary creativity.
Absolutely.
A recipe becomes a foundation
Right.
for endless possibilities.
Endless possibilities. What stood out to you about their suggestions?
Well, I noticed that the suggested toppings,
Yeah.
they all share a savory quality,
Right.
which pairs so well
It does.
with that
Yeah.
sharpness of the Parmesan.
Right. But I think the real takeaway
Yeah.
is that you can use this recipe as a springboard
I like that.
for your own flavor adventures.
It's about understanding those core elements of the recipe
Right.
and then building on those
Yeah.
with your own personal touches.
Absolutely.
Now, before we move on,
Okay.
I want to go back to something they really emphasized throughout the entire recipe and segment,
Okay.
and that's using high-quality ingredients.
Yes.
Why is that so important?
It's huge.
Especially for, a seemingly simple dish like pizza.
Well, using fresh, flavorful ingredients elevates the taste of any dish.
Right.
And pizza is no exception.
Of course.
They highlighted the importance of fresh Parmesan,
Right.
and that principle applies to every part of the recipe.
It makes sense because you're basically building layers of flavor.
You are.
And if you're using the best possible ingredients,
Right.
then each layer
Each layer.
is going to shine through.
Think of it like you're creating a masterpiece.
Okay.
The ingredients are your artistic tools, and using high-quality tools will undoubtedly result in a more beautiful
Right, yeah.
and satisfying
Yeah.
final product.
I love that analogy. It's an investment in both flavor and quality.
It really is.
Speaking of quality, let's move on to the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the broader implications of this recipe and what it reveals about the evolving landscape of home cooking. What are your initial thoughts on that? We've talked about the ingredients, the techniques, the different cooking methods, but I want to zoom out a bit. What does this Parmesan cheese pizza, this recipe,
Yeah.
really tell us about how people are approaching cooking today?
That's a really great question. I think this recipe reflects a few interesting trends that we're seeing in the culinary world. One of the most prominent, I think, is this emphasis on simplicity
Oh, yeah.
and really approachable cooking.
You're right. It is a pretty straightforward recipe.
It is.
Even someone with, limited cooking experience could totally make this.
Exactly. And that, to me, speaks to a growing desire for these home-cooked meals that are both delicious and easy to prepare. I mean, people are busy, right?
Yeah, they are.
But they still crave that satisfaction of creating something homemade.
It's like This recipe strikes that perfect balance between gourmet and achievable.
Hmm.
You get that elevated feel with the Parmesan cheese being front and center.
Right.
But it's still something you can realistically make, on a weeknight.
Absolutely. And that leads me to another trend that I see reflected here, and that's this focus on using high-quality ingredients.
Yeah.
They were so specific about using fresh Parmesan.
Right.
And it seems implied that all the ingredients should be top-notch.
Yeah, like even with a simple recipe, the quality of your ingredients is going to make all the difference.
Precisely. I think it speaks to this growing awareness of the connection between food quality,
Mhm.
flavor, and even our health,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
People are much more conscious
Yeah.
of where their food comes from and
Yeah.
what goes into it.
So it's not just about convenience anymore. It's about
It's not.
making those thoughtful choices and, like you said, investing in ingredients that are good for you and taste amazing.
Exactly. And this Parmesan cheese pizza, I think, really embodies that shift beautifully. It's a celebration of simple, high-quality ingredients
Yeah.
prepared in a way that lets those natural flavors shine through.
You know what? I also think there's an element of nostalgia
Oh,
at play here, too. Pizza is such a classic comfort food.
it is.
It's so familiar.
That's such a great point. I think this recipe taps into that sense of familiarity,
Yeah.
but then elevates it with like this gourmet twist.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Parmesan is key to that.
It's like taking a childhood favorite and giving it this, like, sophisticated makeover.
I love that.
Speaking of sophistication, I noticed that in the recipe in this segment, they emphasize the social aspect of, making and enjoying this pizza.
They did, yeah.
Talking about, family movie night or
Well,
date
who
night.
needs an experience?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that really highlights the growing importance of food as a way to connect with others and create those shared experiences. In our increasingly digital world,
Oh, yeah.
there's something really grounding and meaningful about sharing a meal with people we care about.
It's about more than just, satisfying our hunger. It's about nourishing our relationships
Yes.
and creating memories.
Absolutely. And this Parmesan cheese pizza, this recipe, provides this really delicious framework for doing just that.
Yeah.
It encourages you to gather with loved ones, savor the process of creating something special together, and enjoy a meal that's both delicious and meaningful.
So, listener, this deep dive into Parmesan cheese pizza,
Oh, it's more than just pizza.
it's been about more than just a recipe.
It is.
It's about understanding how we think about food today. The simplicity, that quality,
Good connection.
the connection, yeah. What are your takeaways?
I hope you're feeling inspired to try this recipe at home. Don't be afraid to experiment with different toppings,
Yes.
different cooking methods,
Play around.
even different types of Parmesan
And remember, you can find the full recipe on the Eat Every Slice blog
at eateveryslice.com.
at eateveryslice.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the recipe and see all your delicious creations. So be sure to tag us on social media or leave a comment on the blog.
Until next time, happy cooking.